When I was looking at the Oklahoma City bombing case, the first thing that really hit me, and folks, there's two Roberts Rules of Orders I'll tell you right now. The news that you see when it happens on day one is probably going to be the truth, because on day two it's all been filtered out, okay? So watch what happens on day one. Number two, when you catch any member of the government standing up in front of a camera lying, know that somebody up there is involved, and you've got a case going right there. In the Oklahoma City bombing case, there are logical ways of investigating a crime, and it's all it is a crime, that follow a mathematical formula that's been around for 1,000 years. And there are things that pop up, and when they do, you know something's wrong here. This isn't fitting the model. And one of the things that happened was we had Iraqis on the ground in Oklahoma City prior to this in a terrorist team working for the Khalil faction, as you said, he's not Israeli, he's PLO, but he has an Israeli passport. He would bag man money to Jerusalem and turn that money over to the PLO bunch. But he had an Israeli passport. He also has a criminal record in Oklahoma. I've got copies of it if you want to see it. And by the way, Al Hussein got out of the truck and walked across the street when McVeigh got in the Yellow Mercury and almost ran over a guy at the Journal Records building who looked right at him and identified him later out of the lineup we had. But the two guys in blue jogging suits jumped in the brown Chevy pickup and took off down the street. That's beside the point. The point I'm trying to make is we had a Middle Eastern connection here. And 2 days later, I was briefed by a member of the Israeli Defense Intelligence who happened to be in Tulsa. And I was called to a friend of mine's office that knew this guy and said, you need to see what he's got to say. And he showed me tapes of Middle Eastern terrorist, Arab terrorist organizations blowing buildings up in the Middle East that looked identical to that on many, many occasions that you and I have not seen on our TVs here. But it has happened on at least a dozen buildings that he showed me that were blown up, and every single one of them was because they wanted to blow the building up to get something destroyed that was in the building. They didn't just pick the building because it was at a certain address. They wanted to destroy what was in the building, and they do that by destroying the whole building. Beirut bombing of the Marine barracks was the same thing. You kill 282 Marines by blowing up the whole entire building while they're asleep, that sort of thing. But what happened was all of a sudden the American media jumped up and said within 3 days it went from the Middle Eastern connection and all the APBs that were going out about Arabs and all the guys we were dragging off airplanes and so on to there is no Islamic or Muslim connection, there is no Arab connection, it's the right wing, it's the militia. Because they had McVeigh, they finally pulled out of jail. And who misdirected and redirected this whole thing? Well, I couldn't figure it out because Clinton stood up and said there is no Middle Eastern connection, and that's all we had at the time other than McVeigh. And I looked at that and I went, wait a minute, something's wrong here. Where is ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and all these other news pukes getting this information from? Because it's not coming from the crime scene. So I called some people I knew in the media in New York City, and they traced it down. They said it's coming from two places. It's not coming from Oklahoma City. It's coming from the Anti-Defamation League of the B'nai B'rith, the ADL. And it's coming from a guy named Morris Dees at the Southern Poverty Law Center. Well, I knew pretty much about Mr. Dees and his agenda, which he's a con man who uses scare tactics and tries to come up with newsletters to scare a lot of people to donate money to him, and that's basically all he is. And besides some other things I won't go into up here, that
pervert.
The other thing.
Dirty knees, Dees.
See, I wasn't going to say that. And the other one was the ADL. I couldn't figure out where they fit in because these are the people that should have been jumping up and down right then screaming, we told you, we told you, we told you, the Arabs are the bad guys, send us more money to Israel. That's what they should have done, but they didn't do that, did they? Now why? That was the big question mark. And the media never asked. No one ever asked that question, but I did. And I tried to find out what the answer was. Why was the ADL trying to blame everybody from the NRA to the militia to, Joe Preacher down the street to, the Republican head of Johnson County, whatever. Everybody had to be on the right wing and they were involved in it, and it was completely ignoring the actual suspects. Why were they doing this? Okay. Well, after that, somebody sent me a little manuscript called The Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. And I started going through that, and I ran into some things that I had seen in some of Ralph's writings that I'd already read by that time, and some other areas. And what I saw, folks, being a military officer, was I saw a battle plan. That's all it is. How do you take over enemy territory? That's all that book is, and it does it step by step, using psychological warfare, using business and finances, using trickery, deceit, using every possible tactic you can come up with, including propaganda. And
isn't that a forgery?
it is not a forgery.
It's in the British Museum.
And I traced the forgery deal down too and got a dead end on that.
Well, you know, what I always said is, what is a forgery?
Yeah.
It's an exact copy of the original.
Well, anyway, here's the bottom line, and I'll pass this on, is when I got to this point, I started looking at these guys. I found out an old man came to my office, and he sat me down and he said, "Let me tell you some history." And he was a professor of ancient histories, and he started talking about Khazars. He started talking about these people in Russia who really weren't Jews, but they were militant, and they identified with the Jewish religion for self-protection. There's a long story I won't go into behind that. But he laid it down, name, date, time, and place, to where my head was spinning at the end of it. And he had to come back and do it 2 or 3 times, because I'm a monkey see, monkey do kind of guy. And I'm a visual effects type. I've got to see it on the wall with 3 witnesses and 4 photographs before I believe it. Well, he brought that stuff, and he showed me all of these things. And as far as this mass Jewish conspiracy, no. As far as there being people in the Zionist movement who want to, who have identified everybody else in the world as their enemy, I think that's true. And they wanted this agenda to progress, using Arabs, using whoever they had to do, and if they could take down the right wing while they were doing it, and any patriotic types in there while they were doing it, so much the better. But they wanted to misdirect the agenda away from who really did it, and the reason they wanted to do that in Oklahoma City was because if we got the real bad guys, we would have caught their bosses. And if we caught their bosses, we would have got the motive. And like Mark Furman, what you wanted to ask him was, isn't there a motive? Because the motive means who benefits.
And of course, the plan is also, besides the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, it's been modified, but we had it in the military. It's called the Operation Northwoods. And there's also the report from Iron Mountain, which basically stresses we always have to have an enemy.
And was used at the Reichstag.
That's right.
It was used. You kill your own people, you blame it on somebody else, and everybody gets mad and they're on your side. It's the oldest trick in the world. Romans did that stuff. Bottom line is, we found out that there was a bigger agenda at work here besides 2 guys in a fertilizer truck. We found out who they were. I worked with Jana Davis on this. I worked with a lot of other people, and we finally got to the point. We tried to give it to the FBI, to some good guys. They wouldn't take it, because if they did that, then they would have to work it. If they had to work it, then they would be flushed down the tubes, and they would end up working in Boise, South Dakota, or something.
Like Terrence Yankee.
Yeah, they didn't want to do that. So, you know, they didn't want to count seals in the Aleutians. So basically, we couldn't go any place with it, but the case isn't dead. And we have some Achilles heels. We have 2 Achilles heels in that case, by the way, and I'll just mention them because I didn't mention them yesterday. The Yankee homicide, made to look like a suicide, is a live case. We're going to work that dude one way or the other. We've got people working on it today as we speak. And the other thing is, sooner or later, we're going to have to force them to show us the videotapes of how many people got out of that truck. Okay?